Constantine the Great, the emperor who transformed Rome and changed the course of Christianity. Part 1. The Roman world before Constantine, the 3rd century AD, had nearly destroyed Rome. For decades, the empire that once ruled the Mediterranean world with unshakable confidence had descended into chaos. Between the years 235 and 284, Rome witnessed more than 50 different men claim the imperial purple, most of them dying violently within months of seizing power. Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Persian armies invaded the eastern provinces, even capturing the Emperor Valerian himself in 260. Economic collapse followed military disaster. The silver content of Roman coins plummeted as desperate emperors debased the currency to pay their armies. Plague swept through cities already weakened by invasion and civil war. The empire fractured into competing regional kingdoms. For a time, it seemed the Roman world might simply tear itself apart. Diocletian changed everything. A soldier from the Balkans who rose through military ranks, he seized power in 284 and immediately began rebuilding what the crisis of the 3rd century had shattered. Where previous emperors had failed alone, Diocletian believed the empire needed multiple rulers. He created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 emperors governing together. 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, would rule the empire alongside 2 junior emperors, the Caesars, who would eventually succeed them. Diocletian himself governed the eastern provinces from Nicomedia, while his colleague Maximian ruled the west from Milan. Each Augustus appointed a Caesar to assist him. The system was meant to end the endless cycle of civil wars by creating a clear succession plan. It was meant to provide enough imperial presence to defend vast frontiers. It was meant to restore order. The new imperial system came with dramatic changes to Roman government. Diocletian abandoned the pretense that Rome remained a republic with emperors as first citizens. He presented himself as an absolute monarch surrounded by elaborate court ceremony borrowed from Persian kings. Those who approached the emperor now prostrated themselves before divine majesty. He reorganized the empire into smaller, more manageable provinces, doubling their number to prevent provincial governors from accumulating enough power to rebel. He separated civil and military authority, ensuring no single official could command both provincial administration and regional armies. He built a larger military, expanding the legions to meet constant threats along every frontier. All these reforms required money, and Diocletian extracted it through ruthless taxation that fell heavily on the empire's peasant farmers. The Christians suffered most severely under Diocletian's new order. By the late 3rd century, Christianity had spread throughout the Roman world despite periodic persecutions. Christians had developed an organized church hierarchy, with bishops governing communities across the empire. Their refusal to worship traditional Roman gods or acknowledge the emperor's divine status made them suspect in times of crisis. In 303, Diocletian launched the Great Persecution, the most systematic attempt yet to eradicate Christianity from Roman lands. Imperial edicts ordered churches destroyed, scriptures burned, and clergy imprisoned. Christians who refused to sacrifice to traditional gods faced torture, forced labor in mines, or execution. The persecution varied in intensity across different regions. In the eastern provinces under Diocletian's direct control, enforcement was brutal and sustained. In the western provinces, particularly in Gaul and Britain governed by the Caesar Constantius Chlorus, the persecution remained relatively mild. The empire Diocletian stabilized remained a dangerous place for those who followed Christ. This was the Roman world into which Constantine would emerge as emperor. The Tetrarchy had restored stability, but it remained an artificial system held together by Diocletian's personal authority. The empire's economic foundations remained precarious despite administrative reforms. The religious divide between traditional Roman paganism and growing Christian communities continued to deepen. Rome needed not just stability but transformation. It needed a ruler who could reimagine what the empire could become. That ruler would be born in the borderlands, raised in imperial courts, and shaped by both military campaigns and spiritual transformation. Sources used: The Age of Constantine the Great by Jacob Burckhardt, pages 2867. Constantine and Eusebius by Timothy D. Barnes, pages 327. The Roman Empire by Michael Grant, pages 389–421. The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume 12, pages 67–89. Part 2. The Rise of Constantine. Constantine was born around the year 272 in the city of Naissus, in the province of Moesia Superior, in what is now Serbia. His father was Constantius, an officer from the Balkan provinces who would rise to become one of Diocletian's Caesars. His mother was Helena, a woman of humble origins whose exact status remains debated among historians. Later Christian writers would emphasize her piety and eventual conversion, transforming her into a saint who discovered the true cross in Jerusalem. Contemporary evidence tells us only that she was not Constantius's legal wife, making Constantine's birth technically illegitimate according to Roman law. This detail would matter greatly in the dynastic struggles to come. Constantine's early years remain shadowy, but we know he received the education appropriate for an imperial prince. When Diocletian established the Tetrarchy in 293, he elevated Constantius to Caesar in the west while keeping the young Constantine at his court in Nicomedia. This was both honor and hostage-taking, a common practice ensuring the loyalty of imperial colleagues by holding their sons. At Diocletian's court, Constantine witnessed the machinery of imperial power firsthand. He observed elaborate court ceremonies. He learned Greek and Latin rhetoric. He studied philosophy and literature. He also saw the great persecution unfold, watching as Christians were arrested, tortured, and killed for refusing to abandon their faith. What Constantine thought about this violence, we cannot know with certainty, but he would remember it. The young Constantine also learned warfare. He accompanied the Emperor Galerius on campaign against the Persians, serving with distinction in the hard fighting along the eastern frontier. Roman historians writing decades later would claim Constantine demonstrated exceptional courage and military skill even in his youth. While such accounts are colored by later propaganda, Constantine certainly gained the military experience that Roman emperors required. He learned how legions moved and fought. He understood the importance of supply lines and fortifications. He observed how soldiers responded to commanders who led from the front. These lessons would serve him well in the civil wars ahead. Everything changed when Diocletian abdicated in 305. The architect of the Tetrarchy stepped down voluntarily, expecting his carefully planned succession to proceed smoothly. Constantius became Augustus in the west, while Galerius became Augustus in the east. Two new Caesars were appointed. Constantine was not among them, despite being the son of a reigning Augustus. The Tetrarchy's succession principles favored merit and loyalty to the system over hereditary claims. Constantine found himself in an increasingly dangerous position, the son of an emperor but denied imperial rank himself. According to later sources, he fled Galerius's court to join his father in Britain, riding night and day across the empire, disabling posting station horses behind him to prevent pursuit. Constantine reached his father in Britain in 306, just as Constantius prepared for campaigns against the Picts beyond Hadrian's Wall. The reunion was brief. Constantius died at York on July 25, 306, after less than 2 years as Augustus. The army in Britain immediately proclaimed Constantine emperor. This violated Diocletian's carefully designed succession system, which granted senior emperors the right to appoint new Caesars. But soldiers cared more about dynasty than constitutional niceties. They remembered Constantius. They trusted his son. Constantine accepted their acclamation, knowing it meant war. The Tetrarchy collapsed into the very civil wars it was designed to prevent. Multiple claimants now fought for imperial power. Maxentius, son of Diocletian's old colleague Maximian, seized control of Italy and North Africa. Licinius emerged as a rival in the east. Maximinus Daia controlled Egypt and Syria. Constantine secured Britain, Gaul, and Spain. For several years, these rivals maneuvered and fought, each seeking advantage. Constantine proved himself an able military commander and ruthless politician. He married Fausta, daughter of the old Emperor Maximian, securing a dynastic alliance. When that alliance failed, he ordered his father-in-law's death. He defeated Frankish tribes threatening the Rhine frontier, demonstrating the military victories expected of Roman emperors. By 312, he had consolidated control over the western provinces and turned his attention toward Italy and the ultimate prize, Rome itself. Sources used: Constantine and Eusebius by Timothy D. Barnes, pages 2742, Constantine the Emperor by David Potter, pages 91-127, Constantine by Charles Matson Odall, pages 75-98, The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume 12, pages 90-108, Part 3, The Battle That Changed History in the Spring of 312, Constantine marched on Italy. His rival Maxentius controlled Rome and the wealthy North African provinces, but his regime had grown unpopular. Heavy taxation and arbitrary confiscations had alienated the Italian aristocracy. The loss of Africa to a rebel governor threatened Rome's grain supply. Yet Maxentius commanded superior forces and the advantage of defending fortified positions. Constantine invaded with perhaps 40,000 troops, a force outnumbered by the defenders. He moved quickly down the Italian peninsula, winning engagements at Susa and Turin through aggressive tactics that demoralized Maxentius's forces. As Constantine approached Rome, Maxentius made a fatal decision. Rather than enduring a siege behind Rome's formidable walls, he marched out to meet Constantine in open battle. The two armies met on October 28, 312, at the Milvian Bridge, where the Via Flaminia crossed the Tiber River north of Rome. What happened before this battle remains one of history's most debated moments. According to Lactantius, writing within a few years of the event, Constantine received a divine instruction in a dream to mark his soldiers' shields with a Christian symbol, the Chi-Rho monogram representing the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. Eusebius, Constantine's later biographer, offered a more elaborate account. He claimed Constantine saw a vision in the sky before the battle, a cross of light accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer." That night, Christ appeared to Constantine in a dream, showing him the heavenly sign and instructing him to use it as protection in battle. Modern historians approach these accounts cautiously. Lactantius, writing closer to the events, describes only a dream, not a vision in the sky. Eusebius wrote decades later and claimed Constantine personally told him this story under oath, but Eusebius was both Constantine's panegyrist and a Christian bishop deeply invested in portraying the emperor as divinely chosen. Some scholars accept a genuine religious experience, noting that Constantine's subsequent actions strongly support conversion. Others suggest Constantine might have experienced some form of solar phenomenon that he later interpreted through a Christian lens, or that he made a calculated political decision to court Christian support and later created a providential narrative. What we can say with certainty is that Constantine emerged from this campaign publicly associated with Christianity in ways unprecedented for a Roman emperor. The battle itself was decisive. Constantine's forces pressed Maxentius's army back toward the Tiber. Maxentius had built a temporary pontoon bridge alongside the stone Milvian Bridge to enable his troops to cross. As his forces retreated in disorder, the pontoon bridge collapsed or was destroyed. Thousands of soldiers drowned in the river, weighed down by armor. Maxentius himself perished in the water. His body was pulled from the Tiber the next day. Constantine entered Rome in triumph on October 29, 312. The Senate immediately declared him Senior Augustus. More significantly, Constantine chose not to perform the traditional ceremonies at the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus. This omission did not go unnoticed. Constantine and Licinius, now controlling the east after the death of Galerius, met in Milan in February 313. They agreed to what became known as the Edict of Milan, though no single document of that name survives. The agreement established religious toleration throughout the empire. Christians would enjoy freedom to practice their faith without persecution. Church property confiscated during earlier persecutions would be restored. The edict presented this toleration in politically neutral language, speaking of the supreme divinity, and allowing all subjects to worship according to their conscience. Yet the practical effect overwhelmingly benefited Christians, who had suffered most from previous religious coercion. Constantine went further, showering the Christian church with imperial patronage. He exempted Christian clergy from public obligations. He granted bishops judicial authority. He funded church construction on an unprecedented scale. Within a year of the Milvian Bridge, Christianity had moved from persecuted sect to imperially favored religion. Sources used: Constantine and Eusebius by Timothy D. Barnes, pages 4378. Constantine the Emperor by David Potter, pages 133–164. Lactantius, On the Deaths of the Persecutors, chapter 44. Eusebius, Life of Constantine, Book 1, chapters 27–32. Constantine by Charles Matson Odall, pages 105–127. Part 4. Building a new Roman Empire. Constantine did not simply inherit a Roman Empire. He fundamentally restructured it. His reforms touched every aspect of imperial administration, military organization, economic policy, and religious life, creating patterns that would shape both the late Roman Empire and medieval Europe. Military reform came first. Constantine completed the transformation begun under Diocletian, dividing the Roman army into frontier forces and mobile field armies. The frontier forces, called limitanae, garrisoned the empire's borders in fortified positions. The mobile field armies, the comitatenses, operated as rapid response forces capable of meeting threats anywhere in the empire. This system acknowledged that Rome's borders had become too extensive to defend everywhere simultaneously. Constantine also increased the proportion of cavalry in Roman armies, responding to the mounted tactics of Germanic and Persian enemies. He expanded the recruitment of Germanic warriors, incorporating entire tribal units into Roman forces. These changes reflected hard military realities, but they also accelerated the barbarization of Rome's armies, a process with profound long-term consequences. Constantine reformed the imperial currency by introducing the solidus, a gold coin of high purity that would remain the standard in both the Byzantine Empire and medieval Europe for centuries. This provided the stable currency that economic recovery required after the chaos of the 3rd century. He strengthened imperial administration, continuing Diocletian's policies of separating civil and military authority and governing through an expanded bureaucracy. He elevated certain officials to new prominence, particularly the Master of Offices, who controlled access to the emperor and supervised the imperial intelligence network. These reforms concentrated power in fewer hands while creating the administrative machinery to govern a vast empire from a centralized court. The most visible expression of Constantine's transformation was the city that bore his name. In 324, after defeating Licinius in renewed civil war, Constantine controlled the entire Roman Empire as sole Augustus. He chose the ancient Greek city of Byzantium as the site for a new imperial capital. The location offered extraordinary strategic advantages. Positioned on the Bosporus Strait between Europe and Asia, it controlled maritime traffic between the Mediterranean and Black Seas. Hills and water protected it on 3 sides, requiring fortification along only a single landward wall. It stood closer to the empire's threatened eastern and Danube frontiers than Rome, which had long ceased to be a practical seat of government. Constantine transformed Byzantium into Constantinople, New Rome, dedicating it on May 11, 330. He built with unprecedented scale and speed. Workers constructed massive defensive walls, a hippodrome for chariot racing, an imperial palace complex, public baths, forums, and colonnades. Constantine populated his new capital by offering free land and grain to settlers. He stripped monuments from other cities to adorn Constantinople with classical art. Significantly, he built the new capital as a Christian city. While traditional temples existed, the defining religious structures were churches, including the original Hagia Sophia and the Church of the Holy Apostles where Constantine himself would be buried. Constantinople represented Constantine's vision of a Christian Roman Empire with a new geographic and spiritual center. Constantine's relationship with Christianity evolved from patron to participant. He involved himself directly in church affairs with an authority no emperor had previously claimed over Christian communities. When a theological controversy erupted in Alexandria around 318, threatening to split the church, Constantine intervened decisively. A priest named Arius had begun teaching that Christ, though divine, was created by God the Father and therefore subordinate to him. This teaching contradicted the belief held by most Christians that Christ was eternally co-equal with the Father. The dispute generated intense controversy, dividing Christians throughout the eastern provinces. Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325, the first ecumenical council of Christian bishops. More than 200 bishops gathered in the city of Nicaea in Bithynia, their travel expenses paid by the imperial treasury. Constantine opened the council personally, urging the bishops to reach agreement. The council produced the Nicene Creed, affirming that Christ was of one substance with the Father, rejecting Arius's teachings. Yet theological disputes did not end at Nicaea. Arius retained supporters, and Constantine himself wavered in later years, sometimes favoring compromise positions closer to Arian views. What mattered more than the theological outcome was the precedent. A Roman emperor had convened Christian bishops, presided over their deliberations, and enforced their decisions as imperial law. Church and state had entered a new relationship that would define both for centuries. Constantine's Christianity remains debated. He was not baptized until his deathbed, but this was common practice when baptism was believed to wash away all sins. He continued to use traditional imperial imagery and maintained the title of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Roman traditional religion, throughout his reign. He built churches, but also continued some support for traditional cults. Some historians emphasize his genuine piety, pointing to his extensive patronage of Christianity and personal involvement in theological disputes. Others stress political calculation, noting how Christianity provided ideological justification for autocratic rule and unity in a divided empire. Most likely, Constantine's faith combined genuine belief with acute awareness of Christianity's political utility. He was both a Christian emperor and a Roman autocrat, roles he saw as complementary rather than contradictory. Sources used: Constantine and Eusebius by Timothy D. Barnes, pages 208-244, Constantine the Emperor by David Potter, pages 242-289, The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume 12, pages 184-208, Constantine by Charles Matson Odall, pages 178-215, The Age of Constantine the Great by Jacob Burckhardt, pages 291-334, Part 5, Death, Legacy, and the emperor's lasting influence. Constantine governed the Roman Empire for more than 30 years, an extraordinary tenure in an age when emperors typically died violently within months or years of gaining power. His final years were spent on military campaigns, administrative consolidation, and church patronage. He prepared expeditions against Persia, the empire's eternal rival in the east. He celebrated his Tricennalia, 30 years of imperial rule, with elaborate ceremonies in Constantinople in 335. He involved himself in continuing theological disputes, exiling Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria, the champion of Nicene orthodoxy, and allowing Arius to return from exile. These decisions revealed an emperor who valued church unity over theological precision, willing to compromise doctrine for administrative peace. In the spring of 337, Constantine fell ill while preparing for the Persian campaign. He traveled to Helenopolis, named for his mother Helena who had died a decade earlier. When his condition worsened, he moved to a suburb of Nicomedia. Sensing death approaching, Constantine finally requested baptism. Bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia administered the sacrament. Constantine removed his imperial purple robes and dressed in the white garments of the newly baptized. He died on May 22, 337, around the age of 65. His body was transported to Constantinople and buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles, in a position of honor among the monuments to Christ's 12 apostles. Constantine had planned this burial, symbolically placing himself as an equal among those who spread Christianity. The 13th apostle, Constantine's succession arrangement proved as flawed as the tetrarchy he had displaced. He divided the empire among his 3 surviving sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, along with 2 nephews. The sons, urged on by their armies, ordered the massacre of most male relatives who might challenge them. Constantine's carefully planned succession descended into immediate civil war. Constantine II died fighting his brother Constans in 340. Constans ruled until his assassination in 350. Constantius II eventually eliminated all rivals and ruled alone until his death in 361. The dynastic succession Constantine intended lasted only through violence and fratricidal war. Yet Constantine's transformation of Rome endured. Constantinople grew into a magnificent capital that would outlast Rome itself. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Constantinople remained the capital of what we now call the Byzantine Empire, preserving Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian faith for another 1,000 years. The city Constantine founded would not fall until 1453. Its influence on architecture, art, and urban planning shaped cities throughout the medieval and modern worlds. Constantine's impact on Christianity proved even more profound. His conversion and patronage transformed a persecuted minority into the dominant religion of the Mediterranean world. The churches he built established architectural patterns that would define Christian worship spaces for centuries. The Council of Nicaea established the precedent of ecumenical councils as the mechanism for resolving theological disputes and defining orthodox doctrine. The Nicene Creed, formulated under Constantine's authority, remains the central statement of Christian belief recited in churches worldwide. Constantine's model of Christian emperorship, in which secular rulers claimed authority over both state and church, shaped political theology throughout the Byzantine Empire and medieval Europe. The concept of Christendom, a civilization united by Christian faith and governed by Christian rulers, began with Constantine. Modern historians debate Constantine's motivations and legacy intensely. Some emphasize his military genius and administrative reforms that stabilized the empire and created structures that lasted for centuries. Others focus on his religious transformation, seeing him as either a genuinely pious convert who saved Christianity or a cynical politician who corrupted the faith by binding it to imperial power. Some scholars stress the authoritarian aspects of his reign, noting his ruthless elimination of rivals including his own wife Fausta and son Crispus, executed in 326 under mysterious circumstances. Others point to his religious toleration and legal reforms that improved conditions for the empire's subjects. The evidence supports a complex portrait. Constantine was a brilliant military commander who won every major battle he fought. He was a ruthless politician willing to kill family members to secure power. He was a religious convert whose faith appeared genuine, but who also understood Christianity's political utility. He was an administrator who reformed institutions and built monuments that outlasted his dynasty. He was a husband who executed one wife and son, while elevating another wife and her sons. He was a patron of Christianity who also maintained traditional Roman imperial practices. These contradictions were not incompatible in the 4th century. They represent the complexity of a man operating in a world undergoing fundamental transformation. What remains beyond debate is Constantine's historical significance. He refounded the Roman Empire on new geographic, administrative, and religious foundations. He established Constantinople as a capital that would endure for a millennium. He made Christianity not merely legal but favored, setting it on the path to becoming Europe's dominant religion. He created the model of Christian emperorship that would define political authority in both the Byzantine Empire and medieval Europe. He built churches, convened councils, and intervened in theological debates, establishing patterns of church-state relations that continue to shape religious politics today. Whether one views these achievements as salvation or corruption depends on perspective. That they changed the course of civilization remains historical fact. The emperor born in a Balkan frontier town, proclaimed in distant Britain, victorious under a vision at the Milvian Bridge, transformed the ancient world and created the foundations of medieval Christendom. Few rulers in history can claim comparable influence. Sources used: Constantine and Eusebius by Timothy D. Barnes, pages 245–273, Constantine the Emperor by David Potter, pages 310–352, Eusebius, Life of Constantine, Book 4, Chapters 61–75, The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume 12, pages 209–225, Constantine by Charles Matson Odall, pages 285–316, The Age of Constantine the Great by Jacob Burckhardt, pages 383–412.